I'm not even, I'm just trying to get to the point where I've got the stream working. Well, it's frozen on my screen.
Right, yeah, I don't care if it's a scale soup or not. It just needs to run through some outback. Right, so.
Lots of things going. What's all this shit?
Overload.
What is all this stuff? It's running? All right. It's working. Okay, so I think, what do I need to stick on the screen here? You guys can see me okay. There's the stream. There's the environment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, you guys, if anybody who's been watching this, so many Dionnes. So one of the things is, if you guys have watched me in the last couple of weeks, I've done like the world building stuff. That's where I've talked about, or I've actually been working in the editor, working in Maya, working in a lot of different programs. Artists these days, we use a lot of different programs now, so you'll see me like tabbing through a lot of stuff really fast. I'm even making this motion. So one of the things Dionne has been doing in the background and doing a very good job of is helping actually make a lot of the assets that we've been putting in the world. So even just the pine forest demo that I put together, that had one bush, and it was like 11th hour. Get a bush in there. So like I had Dionne just make lots of bushes. So we have all different kinds of bushes. We have different bushes with different textures on them. We have different bushes for different realms. And those are some of the things that I've been plugging into the pine forest and now into the grasslands. And kind of right now what we're doing is we're going a little bit, starting with a new system and starting with new lighting. So the lighting was like 2.5 weeks of just redoing a lot of materials. Dionne can attest there's still more materials to do. So the next step is to, it's funny, I've got this up, get lots of us. So the next step is to actually start working on more of these pieces, and then we can start using them. Kind of like once we have a bunch of different puzzle pieces, we can actually put them together in different ways and make different environments. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of show Dionne the basics of how to use the terrain editor and use I'm literally just going to start from scratch. We'll build up some terrain. Hopefully we won't have too many random crashes as I'm kind of stressing my computer out. Tyler needs to build a new computer. You and I both need new computers. So I am just going to kind of start on this, and I'm going to pretend like you guys aren't there, and you and I are just going to talk about it as we go.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, let's see, what is this? This is the, okay, so what this is this is my test zone. The flickering is something that I don't think we've remedied yet, but is a very fun seizure-inducing thing. So this whole piece of terrain is actually just one big hexagon. And then everything that you see in it is all done based off of, let's see, one of these settings. Let's see, it's nope, that's not it. Ben has a lot of like work in progress and different pieces that he's made. So these settings here, and you can see there's a couple of boxes that aren't connected to anything, so they're not doing anything. But these settings here represent everything that's happening over here. So if you come down and look down in here, you can actually pick apart visually what's going on over here and correlate it with things that are going on over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this settings off of this and then show you how to actually basically start from scratch. You need paper and a pencil.
Yeah.
Do you want to use a... Okay. So for you guys at home, basically I've got the webcam down in the corner. The little blue corner is the main interface for setting up everything through the editor. It's a visual editor. It's node-based, and you're basically connecting all these dots. So if you want to get any one specific thing out of the editor, you end up chaining all these little pieces together to get what you want. And it's with that you can make a lot of different things. So what I'm going to do, and then the other window is the viewer window. So if you look up here in the corner, it says default mod, and it says control island forest area. What I've done is, by default, everything in this zone, Tyler Test Zone 02, has been assigned this mod, which is represented over here.
Okay.
So under terrain mod is where we save all our mods. There is no undo. There is no control Z in this thing.
Okay.
So my recommendation when you're messing with stuff is to copy and paste it, try it in a different zone. Like you can actually clone these mods, right?
Right.
So like control island forest area, or let's say I wanted to go in here and I really didn't know what I was doing and I wanted to try some stuff out. Either I screenshot some of the previous settings or I clone this and work in the clone version, figure out what I'm going to do, and then put that back into the original one.
Can you delete stuff?
Well, you can delete nodes and everything, but there isn't like a, oh, that's not what I wanted, what were those numbers? You'll see in a moment how the numbers can get complicated.
Right.
When Ben showed me how to do this, he comes at it from a, just his brain is different than mine.
Okay.
So I think of things very visually. So I had to kind of take what he was explaining to me, and he's, you know, a master of spreadsheets. So I had to take that and parse it into a language my brain would get. So I had to come up with a visual representation of it. So some of these numbers, like I wrote them out in a visual representation, and then Andrew jumped in and we whiteboarded it, and he was like, that's what it's doing. And I was like, great. So the reason why I'm showing you how to do this instead of Ben, who's had a little bit more time on it, is because I can parse some of these confusing parts. So let's see, can I just make it nothing? I've never actually tried to make this nothing. I don't know if I can.
So
Oh, there we go, dirt.
Oh,
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I think what I'm going to show you how to make starting terrain first. So I'm actually we're going to make you your own zone. So you just literally go over here into zone, and it searches just like everything else. So we're going to do a new zone, and that all you need to do is we'll call it Dionne's happy joy test zone. Okay, so now you have a test zone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this side of things so that it'll refresh it, and you go over here to File, New World Editor.
right.
So for anybody who's in the stream who remembers this old map, this is the very first map we ended up playing in, and you can see, granted it got a lot of missing geometry that doesn't work right now, but this was one of the original play test zones. Like when I first got here, it was we need trees, we need rocks and things, and all of this stuff I made. So you right click this orange bar and float it. And what that'll do is make it so you can drag it over here. So what's happening here is this is just geometry. This is placed assets. This is all just props, including the terrain. This is not using the terrain editor.
Okay.
The terrain generation system. And all of these things on the side are everything that's in the zone.
Right.
All of this, when we get a little bit more into hand placing and finding things and stuff, we've got a lot of things that need to be fixed on that end, like just making it more usable, grouping, cloning, things like that. Like right now we don't have handles and stuff for placing things. So what you're going to do is go over to Zone and go to Dionne's Happy Joy Test Zone. You are welcome to rename this if you'd like. It's at a later date.
Okay.
So we'll go to your zone, and you'll notice there is absolutely nothing in it. And hopefully the terrain editor will behave. This little kind of red dotted button up here turns on terrain in the world. And what it should do, this is what I've had before where it doesn't show up. Let's see if I can make it show up. Okay, so it was showing up in a different place in my camera. Okay, so this is showing up at 0, 0. And what this is the beginnings of making terrain. So these terrain levels are basically subdivisions, and I think at, I forget what I put, I think it's at subdivision -8, I think, or it's at subdivision -9, I believe, if I remember correctly, was 512 meters from point to point. And then at 10, it's 1024 point to point.
Okay.
So usually what I do is I just kind of start, if I'm just testing things and making stuff and playing with things, I'll start here. For the terrain editor right now, you have to touch each one of these guys and give them a little push, and it will start generating the other pieces. So you see how, so right now it's just the error that was coming up when we were generating terrain. So you see how I'm starting to get all these little other triangles coming out?
Right. So right now you're just making the shape of the island.
Yeah. So everything is in triangles, and every division is a subdivision of triangles.
Right.
So right now this gives us a good play area, and you'll see it's huge. Come on, clickety click.
So what is a good size?
Oh, like for you right now, this is just plain. When you're actually, if you were to actually make a map, we would have a very clear definition of how big we want the map. But what you have to remember is that you're building everything as a part of a whole. So when we actually make an island, there's different ways that it can be put together. You can go in and select a point and say, like, I want the pine forest specifically right here. Or what you can do is you can do like a noise pattern and pick a random value within that noise pattern to seed a specific setting of stuff.
Right. Okay.
So the way you have to think of this is either as a kind of random generator or a very specific where I want to place things system. So it allows for both.
Okay.
You'll see as we go. So right now there is no terrain on this thing because we haven't actually assigned it a mod. So what we're going to do over here is we're going to make a new terrain mod. So this is Dionne's playtest. Okay, so right now nothing has been assigned here, right? So there is nothing to generate. Over here, you come in, this is basically your workspace. You're going to right click and it gives you a whole bunch of choices of things to create.
Okay.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to start simple and we're going to start with noise. So that's create Perlin 2D select.
Right.
And it's Perlin noise is a function that creates a noise pattern. Right now we have it actually creates one. What I want to do is 2 overlapping noise patterns so that it's less obvious when if you zoom really far out, and I can actually see like a large swath, you can start to see the patterning.
Okay.
Or you can actually see more of the function that it is a noise pattern versus seeing a repetition. So some of the things that I've done that I've learned is to try and reduce that patterning by just a couple of tricks and things as I've been in here. So creating Perlin 2D select is probably the most confusing thing for me that I had to figure out. This just absolutely threw me in what it does. And I understand what it does, it's just that I don't understand what the numbers mean by what I'm putting in the scene. So the best visual representation of this is, you see how there's a value here that you enter?
Mm-hmm.
And what you can do is you can add more of them.
So
Okay?
that's like overlay.
Well, I'll explain it. The visual representation of it is you've got -1, 1, and 0, right?
Right.
So this starts at -1 and goes to a value, and then starts at another value and goes to 1.
Mm-hmm.
That encompasses the entire range. And if you don't fill a certain range, you'll get like some gray noise where it's like, I have nothing to put in here. Okay? So what this actually is doing is you got to think of it as a big noise function. That noise is kind of doing something like this, right?
Right.
And what you're doing is, depending on where the values are, -1, to 1, wherever you're grabbing values is where you're going to get more or less of the noise.
Right.
So the easiest way to think of this is the less close you are to the middle, the less close you are from like 0. So if you're at one end of the spectrum or the other, you're going to get less drawn on the terrain. This is a selection. You can use this for drawing grass, for props, for terrain, for materials, for whatever you want to draw.
Okay.
You're basically picking how much of that is going to be on there.
Right. Okay.
So if you were kind of catching, if you were up here, you'd be catching just little bits, right? And if you were down here, you'd just be catching little bits. And if you're in the middle, you're catching a lot more. So I'm going to put this into practice because it's the easiest way to understand it.
Okay.
So the simplest version of this would be to I'm going to remove some of these. The simplest version of this would be to put a texture on the ground. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a texture. And I'm going to create another texture. And then what you do is you drag from point to point. And if it ever just kind of doesn't seem to catch, the minute you go back to this, you'll see it pop back up. So right now, I have this linked to 2 different textures. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want all of it to be this one material. It should really say material. It's not a texture. So right now, it's going from -1 to 0 to 1.
Right.
Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a material on this, and we'll pick, what do you want to pick?
Viking material?
Viking material. Let's see, what did I do for the Viking? So this will bring up every material. It's not necessarily just terrain stuff.
Right.
Here, we'll do the terrain Pino 2 ground cover mud Viking.
Okay.
Unless you want to make a grassland. So we'll pick that, and what we're going to do is we're going to save this. So now Dionne's playtest has some save settings. One thing I totally forgot is you need to set one node as the root.
What do you mean one node?
Each one of these being a node, you right-click it and set root. That means it's the start point.
Oh, right. Okay. So, yeah.
So now that that's set, we're going to go over here into the upper corner of the actual viewer. And you see these little dots over here?
Yeah.
What that represents is everything in the scene. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to say Dionne, and it should. There's your playtest. So
Right.
you have to click it, hit OK, and there it is. Let's get this to. For some reason, I don't seem to be drawing extra nodes. What's supposed to be here is little nodes are supposed to be popping up when I touch these, but they are not. So I'm going to save this. The little pile of pancakes in the upper corner saves it. It'll say like, "Oh, are you sure you want to do this?" That's important because if you're actually auditing a live zone,
Right.
everybody in that zone is going to get this update all of a sudden. So if you were like, "Here's a mountain," they're all going to get that update and go flying up in the air, or possibly fall through the ground.
Right. So, what should you do if you want to preview it?
Okay, so hold on, we're not there yet.
Okay.
I'm gonna switch zones here and see if I can get the terrain to draw, which it doesn't seem like I can. All right, well, science can still continue without the terrain showing up. So if we come down here, you can see this is huge,
This
right?
is huge, yeah.
So we're gonna come way down in here, and there's that Viking mud texture. Super repetitive. It's the only texture we've got in there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say I want half of you to be one material, half of you to be another material. So I'm going to set this material, and we'll look up Viking again, and we'll put in terrain stuff, the pine forest stuff. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want this to go to 0. And basically, so the way to think of this is there's an in and an out value. and overlapping those values creates blends between the two. So if you think of it as an in and an out, there's an in and an out on either side.
Right.
So what you're doing here is we're going to say I want one material to go to 0. I want this to end at, I'm going to put this at negative 0.9. I'm confusing myself already.
Wait, so you don't need to edit the second one? The second, the lower one? To
No, you do.
control
You do.
Oh, okay.
So if you look now, what I've done is I've said I want this material to go from -1 to 0.9, which will be 100%.
Yeah.
And then from 0.9 to 0 to 0.1, I'm going to start blending out, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a value in between here, and I'm going to put from, actually, did I do this wrong?
This was a separate case than the one we're talking about.
This always confuses me until I get something set up, and I'm like, oh, that's how it works. So I'm going to change this to 0.05. This can be, I think these both can be 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 0.05 to 0.2, and then I'm going to put,
Does those numbers correlate with the one on top? Or you can just...
they do correlate.
Okay.
You're basically creating a balancing act.
Right.
All right, so now you've got two materials
Oh, I see.
on the ground. And what we're representing by where they overlap, so you have to, what I do is when I think of this, is I think of it like I'll do this. I'll draw it out, right? And then this space is where I'm overlapping. So this is going from -1 to 0. And then the other one, I should just do a new one, -1 to 0. And the other one is going from, actually it's going to 0.1. So what I did is in between here, I set the next value at 0.05 halfway in here that goes to 1. So this little overlap is where they're going to have a little bit of a blend.
Okay.
So if you look really close, you can see where there's a small amount of blending.
Yeah.
And basically by overlapping those values more, you get more blending. And that you're going to want to change as you just look at the materials. Some materials that are very close in color will blend really well, some won't.
Okay.
So if you come out, you can see right now what we've done is you can see the noise, right?
Yeah.
So there's a value down here for size, and that is basically how big each section of the material takes up. So if I change this to 50,
Oh, right.
you've got much bigger spaces of each one.
Right.
And if I change it to 25, you've got smaller spaces, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now we're blending two materials. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, I want to put some spawners in here. So I'm going to create a spawner. Now the one thing you'll note is that there is no way to pull a point off of the textures.
Pull a point? What do you mean?
Pull like connect dots.
Oh, right.
So what you do is if you mouse over one of these connectors, it'll pop up this little handle that comes off. If you click that, it'll make the arrow go away.
Oh, okay.
So in this case, what I want to do is I want to say that this section of noise, I want it to be this material, and on that material, I also want to spawn things.
Okay.
Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create basically a blank node called a multi, which just allows you to mix things together.
Yeah, plug in more stuff.
So I'll plug this, and then I'm going to add another node to the multi. And I'm going to connect both of them to the texture and the spawn. And each one of these can have a weight. So like let's say you had multiple spawners here, like lots of grass and lots of flowers. And you had set it up and they were evenly distributed. You could change the weighting of one over the other and get, say, more grass or more flowers.
Right, okay. Oh, so that's what the weight does.
So spawners, let's go into grass. It made so many grass cards, and the problem is some of these are experimental, so you get rid of some of these. These grass card generics are so we'll do the green extra tall. And then this little plus sign, I'm going to add another card.
What do
And
you
the-
mean add another card? As in add
Add another
smaller-
grass card.
Oh. Right, so you're saying to mix those two grass cards together.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm just going to pick another one. Okay. So now I have two different models
Right.
that are going to spawn on here. Each one of these has a whole bunch of other fun settings. Probability weight. Basically, everything in the row knows about everything in the row.
Yeah.
If I go down and create a row below it, it no longer has knowledge of the row above it. What this allows you to do is to give things on the top weighting and collision radius that are paying attention to each other, and then other things that don't. So in this case, a good example of that is I want to spawn a bunch of rocks. But if every one of the rocks has a collision radius, they will never overlap. They will never get closer, right?
Right,
They'll basically be a noise pattern of rocks.
right.
So what I can do is add another row and put a couple of other rocks, same model, whatever you want to do, and they no longer have knowledge of the first row. So it's kind of like I drew some rocks, and then I'm drawing some more rocks.
Right, but the first one won't appear. Only the
They'll
bottom.
both appear.
Oh, they'll both appear.
Yeah. The point is like, since everything in here has a collision radius, so this is basically saying I want there to be a minimum of 1 meter around whatever I'm choosing. So like if you put a big rock, you kind of want to have a general idea of like, it's a roughly 5 meter wide rock. I don't want trees spawning inside of it, so I give it a 5 meter radius.
Okay.
The issue is that if I put another thing over here like this grass, maybe I should just put rocks in. That might be a better case since I'm talking about rocks.
Yes.
It's bigger.
All right.
So when do you know to use the second one?
I'll give you a perfect example in a moment.
Okay.
Hence rocks.
The question is, when this event gets run through two, do I add a damage component? Do I want the current damage component?
Okay, let's scale these up. I'm going to put their minimums at 2.
So,
And I'm going to put their
Is that the size?
maximums,
Okay.
5. And we're going to hit save, and something went wrong. I should be getting an update over here. So, oh, it's, you know what I think it is? It's that. Okay,
Oh,
So-
whoa.
so what this likes to do is if you have an empty spawner, it won't save.
Okay.
You need to have something selected. So right now, all these rocks just popped in as their distance. What do we call them?
LODs?
Yeah, no, they're imposters. So in a moment, they've now popped into geometry.
Oh,
And
right.
just for people watching at home and for you, the viewer is not indicative of the game. So there's differences like these really hard, normal black edges.
Okay.
The other thing is the person who made this rock, you, didn't scale down your UVs.
Oh,
So they're really dense, right?
okay.
So this is one of the things I was changing the other day. So right now, let me change this to a different rocks, a different color. Let's put in another rock. And let's pick the brown one that I made. Brown, that's ground clutter. Oh, here, let's see if we put the darker Viking one in. Okay, so in a moment here, these will all pop. So you can see we've got the Viking rock and the gray Arthurian rock as we've themed them temporarily for the biomes we were working on. Come on. No. No. Editor, don't crash. I may have crashed it doing that. Alright. I crashed it.
Okay, fun.
All right, so we'll open all this up again. Terrain mod, Dionne. We'll open that up. And we saved it, so we're good. We'll do a new world editor. We'll float this. And we'll put it back over here. We'll go to your happy, happy, joy, joy scene. That's interesting.
Whoa.
Never saw that before. Okay, let's take the ground clutter one. And let's get him closer to the size of our other one. Tyler can't type. We'll make the other one smaller. Okay, so now you see we've got a bunch of rocks. Now what's happening is I don't know the size of each of these rocks, right? So I've got them right now with a collision radius of 1 apiece. So right now, like this is probably like a 2-meter rock. You can see how there's some overlap. So if we change these to 2, we're going to get a lot less rocks. So what it's trying to do right now is it's trying to put most of the rocks on the material, the greenish one. So if you look, you can see where the overlap occurs, and it starts blending into the other one, and I can show you ways around that. But basically what it's trying to do right now is lay out all these rocks without them overlapping too much. So if I pump their collision radius up significantly, they're now going to have a huge amount of space between them, so you'll see a lot less rocks. Okay?
Okay. That's cool.
Okay. So now that you've got a bunch of rocks spawned, I can actually even, let's just pump their collision radius up.
So
Make
they're
them
more
really
spaced
far
out.
apart. Yeah, they actually illustrate what I'm trying to show you. So now what's happening is all the rocks are trying to, I'm kind of curious why this one's, there's a couple that are kind of close to each other that,
Like that one is on top of.
yeah, I'm curious why that's happening. Which is possible that one of the rocks has an offset that's set incorrectly. That was like when you export something and it shows up offset from 0.
Right, the translate.
That could very well be the case. Let me open something. Let's change this to a couple of things I was just working with. They're still pretty close. I don't know, maybe we've encountered a bug. I'm not sure. Because I haven't seen them do this. A bug? Throw your bush in there, it should be. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure why they're overlapping so much. Makes me wonder if there's something with the scaling I've done here. That much, because I usually don't scale things so much. Otherwise, it will look bad. See, things like this, not really sure why the rock is so close to the bush. And why I'm getting like 3 bushes right next to each other.
The bush is quite pretty.
That's your bush. You made that. Okay, so what I can do now is I can put in another layer, and we can put in a tree. So I'm going to pick the small pine tree, a little short guy. We'll put the tall one in. And it will redraw. And as you can see, I have a lot of them now.
Oh, yeah. Oh my god.
So they're still coming in. Alright, so the reason why there's so many is because my collision radius is set to 1.
Okay.
So these are all 1 meter apart from their pivot.
Right.
So if we want to reduce all that, we will change that number. And now we get a lot less trees. Basically, this is kind of the simple version of how you start putting terrain down and deciding where things go. Now, the one thing you don't have to do is you don't necessarily have to spawn items attached to a texture. You can just spawn items, right?
Okay.
So what I did when I made like the grass area is I actually said, okay, grass, I want you to be on this material, and I want you to be within this range on that material. And then I left a little space, and I made another layer, and in that range, I put all the tall grass. And then I set this size value down low, and it gave me little pockets of tall grass to break up the fairly even grass.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Sort of?
Sort of.
This is just something you're going to have to play with, and you and I can sit and work on it.
Yeah.
So right now we've got some of the little pine trees. These guys are fairly tiny. With the bushes, with the rocks. They're all trying to spawn primarily, for viewers at home, on the green material, right? You'll
Right.
notice that we're starting to get some of this overlap.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
lesson number 2 once you kind of tackle all this stuff, like how to contain some of this stuff. So on the brown, muddy Viking stuff here, what we can do is we can create another spawner. We'll create a multi, and we'll break the texture connection, and we'll put the multi up in front. Usually it's good to try and create some
Yeah.
semblance of what's going on
Be
here.
organized.
Yeah, so I'll drag this to the texture, add another layer, and we will create another spawner.
Okay, so those spawners are gonna spawn on that texture.
Yep, well, it's this noise is what it's going to do.
Oh, right, right.
So that texture just happens to be part of the equation.
Okay.
It's actually using this noise function to actually pick within a range of where it's going to spawn. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's pick some of that scruff grass, I called it. And we'll do the clumps. Okay. And we'll give them a clay radius of 3, and we'll hit save. And now you've got that model spawning all over the mud, right?
Right.
And like I said, you see how it starts getting some blending,
Mhm.
and there's a way to reduce that if you want to. But one of the things is it kind of gives you a lot of little natural happy accidents when you start blending things. So right there, that's the basic thing to tackle, is trying to pick different areas to spawn stuff. Now what I can also do is I could add another layer into the Perlin select, and I could pick a range in here and say, okay, I want you to spawn, I don't know, anything, right? Any model I could just spawn in that spot.
Mhm.
So in this case, I could be like down in the negative range where we are spawning this one, right? So what I could do is if I picked a range within this, what that'll do is it will spawn
Something
stuff
small.
within here.
Right.
So if you think of these as shapes with like an inner and an outer, what this will try and do is, depending on in that linear range, right, where you put your numbers will depend on inside or outside of that.
Right.
So when I did the pine forest, when we first did it, it was just like pine trees everywhere, and let's stress the system and see what we can handle. What I did after that was I created kind of something very similar to this, and then what I said is I wanted pockets of the smaller trees, so there were areas of density and areas of openness.
Right. So that's how you did it. Okay.
Yeah. So what I did is I said, in this open area where I am spawning the big trees,
Mhm.
create a few small clumps
Right.
within that. So I created just a little section inside of that. So in here, what I could do is just say from negative 0.8 to negative 0.7.
We're trying to figure out.
It's a good number.
And then what we'll do, and what we'll do is we'll create a little bit of a blend.
So the first start and end is like the where you want to spawn, and then the second one
Yeah.
is where you blend.
In all honesty, it might be better for me to show you like one that I've done, so I could be like, this is exactly how those numbers work and what they do, because it might be a better example. So in this case, I'm going to spawn. We'll spawn more pine trees.
Basically, spawn and blend. Right.
Spawn and well, like I said, the noise function when it comes to blending and everything is anything you put after that. It doesn't necessarily have to be the terrain. It could be, you know, items. So in this case, I'm going to use it to make items. So I'm going to pick the medium tall pine tree, and we'll give it a collision radius of 3. And we're going to hit save. And what I should get, maybe not. Oh, so between 0.8 and 0.7 is my blend, and between 0.6 and 0.65 is my blend. The problem is there's no middle ground. There's no solid between 0.7 and 0.6. There's very little of that represented on the screen here in space. So what I need to do is change this to like 0.75, and we'll change this to like 0.4.
Okay.
And this to 3.5 because we're going up negative. I should get some more trees. There they are.
So how long did it take for you to understand that fully?
It took me a lot of tries, really, just figuring it out. Let's see if I can get them closer together to. All right. So this is one of the things where I'm like, okay, what did I do there? So basically, I've picked a very large range for these things to spawn in.
Right.
So even with a little bit of blending, they're just basically spawning everywhere. So this needs to be like, let me just make this really tiny.
In the traditional sense of I apply a class to a character because and I think that there is
See if I can make it seem like I know what I'm doing. Yeah, this takes a little finagling. Okay. Let's see. So I am still not getting any. I would think I would at this point, actually.
So is Preline noise the only thing that we can use, or is there others?
Hold on. Yes, there are other ways to do this. Yeah, this isn't. I'm trying to go quickly, and I can show you another example where I use this much more effectively and have it all laid out. So basically what we're doing is a noise function to decide where things are.
Right.
You can also use a size function and a slope function.
Size function?
Size function represents the size of the terrain. So if you think of each of those triangles, right? The triangle, there's going to be a lot more triangles that are going to be smaller up close and big triangles in the back because the terrain LODs based on distance.
Right, okay.
So what you can do is you can say, based on the size of the triangles, that's when I want you to start drawing something. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do is, you notice these tall trees are spawning way out there, right?
Yeah. Now
the one thing you have to remember is that we have settings on each of these models that is an LOD distance. So sometimes what will happen is you'll be like, I did this myself. I set things to spawn up at a very far distance, but they weren't showing up, and that's because I realized, like, when I think it was the bushes that you had put in, we had given them all just a default value.
Alright.
It was like 50 meters or something.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, no wonder. I'm telling them to spawn out there, but they know not to spawn out there because they have another setting on them. So things like that you'll just kind of run into. But if you look way out there, you can see these trees. I don't know how well this is going to work. We'll try it. And I'm going to create a size select. That's not right. Size trigger.
Size trigger for
for spawning these trees. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the size trigger
through the thing.
in between the
Right.
noise selection and the spawner.
Right. So now you're controlling the size of that spawn.
Exactly. And I'm going to put the size at 1, meaning 0 is right where you are, like 12 is way out there at the big mountains in the distance. And I don't seem to have any. Why do I have none? Let's see. One of the things I've noticed is I think there's a correlation. I haven't figured out exactly. I haven't talked with Andrew about it. But I think there's a correlation between how lumpy the terrain is and the actual size it's using. Because I should be seeing these guys now. They should be spawning up close. Let's see.
There is an ability stat that is the word
Oh, is that how you make slopes?
Well, in this case, that's how I made a slope. I did it by hand. I was curious if that would affect
Oh, that's
anything.
cool.
You can actually do it procedurally too. Well, there's one tree.
So if you make you do it procedurally, can you still go in and hand?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, that's cool.
Okay, so what I think has happened, I think my theory is correct, that the smoother your surface, the farther out your number has to be. I'm not 100% on that yet. I think if I put this at like 5, it's going to show up at a much farther distance.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so now I've got tall trees showing up much farther away. And if I lower this, they're gone.
Yeah, they're gone.
They only show up close. I think I just needed to increase that value a little bit.
Okay.
So one of the things Ben and I talked about is that we noticed that when we picked an area to spawn, you notice there was a lot of overlap.
Right.
And when we spawned these trees, they were kind of showing up all over the place. You couldn't really say there was a defined spot where they showed up. It seems like it behaves better if you have this size trigger as a qualifier, and it seems to kind of net things a little bit better.
Okay.
So a lot of times you'll see when I've got little bunches of things, there's a size trigger before the spawner. So I'm willing to bet the reason why I'm not seeing too many of these is as I go, they're going to pop in just a couple little sections.
So do you put the size trigger for every one of your spawners,
No, not necessarily.
or just for your trees?
There's a huge balancing act. You got to remember that there's an LOD on the asset. There's how big the asset is, like how far away do I want trees popping in, right? And you also have to remember that at a very far distance, they're going to imposter. So for things like big trees and stuff, you want them to be drawing at a much farther distance.
Right.
However, you may not want them all to be there at that distance. You might want to be like less forest as cards out in the distance. So that's basically you have another way to control LOD.
Okay.
So right now we are actually using the terrain size to generate objects for grass,
Okay.
as with everything else. The grass is just a prop. It could be a rock. That's something we need to change moving forward. We need to treat grass differently, and we need to fade it in instead of popping it in.
Right.
But one of the problems is if I spawn my grass at 10, basically off in the distance, you're going to have a bunch of grass that's just taking up little pixels, and it's just eating up space.
Right.
So what I've done is I'll like break it up so there's 2 spawners at 2 different settings. I'll have like one at size 2 and one at size 1, and I'll spawn some of the grass, like the bigger double cards of grass.
Okay.
I'll spawn those slightly out farther, and then when you get closer, you'll start spawning like the clumps of grass or things that are more individual cards, and what you get is some and more. And then you can set it up to a third where you got a few, some more, and then some more. And as you walk forward, it just adds
Right. Okay.
because the terrain is getting to a higher or a higher level of detail.
Right.
So you're going like 3, 2, 1, and then you're at 0.
Right.
So like if you look at my field, it's set up with like 2 spawners, one at a distance, one close. And to control the amount of cards at a distance that are spawning, I increase the collision radius.
Okay.
So there'll be just a few of them out there, and then when I walk closer, you'll see a bunch more pop in addition to what was already there.
Right. Then how would you set up the node then?
The note?
Like to spawn two spawners. You said like you put triggers.
Yeah. So I would just put a multi in here. Like if I wanted to, like all these rocks, right?
Yeah, because you talk in a way that there's levels to the spawners.
So in this case, I'm going to attach another multi here, and I'm going to add another layer. And another spawner.
Ah, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So now you've got, I've broken up my spawning of these things into two levels. And this one would be the farther one, so I'd select 2, and I'd set this one to 1. And let's pick a tiny rock. Clearly I've spelled things differently at different times. Okay. It's let's see. Okay, now I've got what should be happening here is within this area,
Right.
I should be making this texture show up, and then at 2 different distances or terrain LODs, I'm going to be spawning the bush and rocks and pine tree, and up closer I'm going to be spawning this tiny little Viking rock.
Okay.
And we'll hit save and let's see what we get. Now what we've done here is we've also added in a size trigger. So what you're going to see is some of the stuff you had earlier that was overlapping will get more encased in where it's supposed to be. So we are getting less of what we had before.
Right.
We'll get more encased in where it's supposed to be. So we are getting less of what we had before.
Right.
So if you look, instead of seeing the bushes and the big rocks, so you see like there's a rock. See, this is the thing I think is what happened. You notice how they're much farther apart from each other now? I think for some reason, and this just, Andrew might just need to go in and see if there's a bug in there, but things are much more separated out when I put that size trigger on. I don't know what happens, but it seems to be a better outcome. Because remember we gave these things a big collision radius and then they were still on top of each other?
And they're supposed to spawn more.
So I'm going to reduce their collision radius, and now I'm going to get more of them. Right? So now I got more bushes and rocks. And if you look right up close, I've got these little rocks on the ground. So let's see, if I go forward, right, we start seeing other things pop in, and you see the rocks, the little rocks starting to appear right here where my mouse is. They're all drawing in as I go.
Okay.
So the little rocks draw in as I move forward, and that's basically the line of spawn below 1. So they'll start spawning in this area, and then everything else is out here.
Right.
So you can see there's a rock and a bush way out there, and no little rocks. Now what you're doing, what you have to, all of our ground clutter stuff, like I said, needs to have more of a fade to it. Fades are expensive. So you kind of do it sparingly, because what you're doing is you're instead of going from 0 to 1 and drawing that pixel saying, yep, there's my bush, you're kind of saying, well, no, I've got 10% of the bush, 20% of the bush, 30% of the bush, and that takes a longer rendering time. So if you look at a lot of games that have a lot of detail up close, like Black Desert's a good example. They have a lot of detail in their characters and in their environments, but there's a lot of popping that happens kind of in the mid-ground.
Yeah.
And if you look at a game that has kind of balanced that out, you'll see the popping at a farther distance.
Right.
Popping can always be reduced by how you build your LODs. So when you and I talk about like little things like don't make the LODs very different as much as you can, that reduces the kind of subconscious, oh, that was a big pop.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So any of those little subtleties are great. Plus our LOD system has the ability to add instead of swap.
Okay.
So let's say you've got a box with handles on it. If the box is always there and never changes, and all we're doing is adding on the little pieces, it's a much tinier swap than if we were swapping the entire box with the handles added on
Right.
from one LOD to another. You'll see the whole thing. You know, it depends on your draw time, it depends on your graphics card, it depends on your screen refresh rate. But anything we can do to reduce that will reduce that little visual pop that occurs.
Right.
So by doing an additive system instead of a swapping system, we can actually have that box stay and just add on the handles.
Okay.
So there's a lot of juggling. You'll just start figuring out your own voice as you do this.
Right. Trigger number. So the further the number, the further the thing draws, right?
Wait, what?
The trigger.
Trigger? Size
Yeah.
trigger is basically the distance.
Yeah. So the higher the number, the further the distance.
Yes.
I need to write it down. Trigger number is-
There's two other flags that I haven't touched on for objects. One's aligned to terrain and aligned to normals. The aligned to terrain will, take that pivot and do this with it. So if you're face normal on your terrain, so I'll do this instead. If my face normal is doing this,
Mhm.
when it puts the rock on it, it will then go like this.
So it follows the terrain.
Yes.
Okay.
And then aligned normals will take the face normals, well, actually the vertex normals of everything around it and blend them into the object. It's really useful. Its only real use that we do it with is grass.
Okay.
Because remember how we set the vertex normals of the grass straight up?
Yep.
That's because the code assumes they're straight up, and then what it does is it blends between the terrain normals and the grass. So instead of seeing like a flat card that's reflecting light flat off of it,
Right.
it'll blend it in with the ground so that the two look like they're one. They'll
Oh,
blend
right.
better.
Okay. That
Um,
makes sense.
let's see. What time are we supposed to stream till?
I have no idea.
Hey, Genesee. Genesee. She can't hear me.
$5:30.
5:30. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, so do you kind of get this without playing with it?
Yeah.
Okay. So where multis are basically just blank boxes, textures, size triggers, and what goes on it. These guys know about each other. This one does not know about these guys.
Okay.
Okay. So like if I can drop the collision radius down on this, and we should see more of these guys show up. So what this will allow is this pine tree could then penetrate into a rock or a bush
Right.
because it has no idea where those two items are.
So wait, but this and that is the same thing.
Yes, they're all together, but they don't know about each other between the two lines.
Yeah. What does that mean?
It means that these values set here
Uh-huh.
don't have anything to do with this value. This guy acts on his own.
Right. So on top of this thing is still spawning.
Yes, and now there is no top and bottom here. Just so you remember, like it's not like I'm adding and putting
Yeah.
another thing on. It's basically just, like if I take this row away, we'll stop spawning the small pine tree. Okay,
Okay.
and we'll just be spawning the bush and the rock. Now the bush and the rock know about each other.
Okay, I get it. So
They're all holding hands.
this whole thing is one layer itself.
Yes.
And then this one is a
and I
different
can just keep adding.
Right, okay.
Right.
Right.
So these guys are holding hands. This
Yeah.
one's over here saying I've got a collision radius of 5, and the other one's like me too. Right? So they know about each other. And now the tree over here, he's just by himself, not
Yeah.
holding hands with us. So he has no idea what we're doing.
Yeah.
He doesn't know. We didn't tell him what my collision
But
radius
he's still
is.
around us.
But he's still around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
But
Got it.
he's also really fucking pushy and doesn't know about us. So he may just be like, I'm here. Right?
Okay.
So there's a lot of ways that you can get intersections of objects that you don't want.
Right.
So one of the things we've talked about, what we need is to put in kind of a knowledge of self, so that I can say that this rock's minimum radius is, say, 5 meters. That solves, in this case, it roughly solves this problem if I'm kind of flat and everything. But one of the problems we have is if the terrain is doing a lot of lumpy stuff, and I tell it to only spawn in a slope select, which I haven't done yet for you. If I say I only want you to spawn between 0 and 10 degrees, roughly flat,
Right.
what could happen is the geometry may be doing this, and there's one little triangle that's perfectly flat, it might stick a 5-meter rock right in the middle of that, and then you'll have it like sticking out where it doesn't look like it belongs, if that makes sense. So that's one of the things we need to add in is kind of knowledge of self. So the one thing I just mentioned there was a slope select. Slope select looks a lot like the purlin thing, and what this allows you to do is 0 to 180 degrees, and that's the angle of the terrain. So you go up, 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 and over, and and when you get all the way around, that's for doing interior spaces.
Like that. Oh, okay.
So like if you a cave or something,
Yeah.
it'd be like spawn things at up here.
Right. So that's the procedural way of making slopes.
No. That is basically, you mean you making hills and things?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to hills and things, and then I can use that as a further example of how to color this.
Right.
All right, so where we're drawing these guys. Okay, so we've got a texture, and we've got these triggers of when to draw stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to add in some noise, and that is a warp. So I'm going to say, well, in this, I want to add a warp. So I am just going to put 1, and this is going to go nuts. So now what we've done is we've said, in this space, I want you to warp the crap out of it. And what it does is it blends. It's not like saying, okay, leave everything else alone, 0 to 1. It's blending everything.
Right.
So all the up and down craggy stuff is happening to this material as we've defined it.
Right.
You'll notice over here it's not happening. Okay, so one of the things I need to start tackling is figuring out how to successfully visually make big rocky mountains and stuff like this.
Right.
I haven't tackled that yet. Because just doing this little bit of noise isn't going to really work. So you get a lot of interesting happy accidents and stuff like this. Let's see. So the bias gives you a little bit of an offset. And I will drop this down to like 0.01. And now we're back down to like nothing. Okay, so now what we've got is some lumps. And we're doing it all in this one space based on the Perlin 2D select. We're doing up and down. So if I just want to do down, it'll get a lot less lumpy. So what it's doing is it's taking the flat terrain you did and dragging some of it down lower.
Right, okay.
Now all of this is based on a size of 50. Right? So what I can do is if I drop this down to like 10, I'm going to get much smaller little lumps. So you see how we've gotten, what it does is it takes the same amount of space I had and breaks it up into smaller values, all equaling the same amount.
Right, okay.
So now I've got a whole bunch of little lumps. And this was the hump we pulled up by hand. Because we pulled some of this up when we were playing with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can also add other things into this. You can say, well, I only want you to do this lumpiness at a certain size. So for like little details, I'll put like a size trigger on it. So it only happens at like up close to me.
Basically, you can put a size trigger on everything.
Yep.
Okay.
So right now we've kind of generated like a lumpy ground, and if I put the up,
Right.
this should be more dramatic
How do you choose a certain section?
with the noise. So what you could do, if you wanted to say within the warp, I only want to do it in a certain section, I can put in another Perlin noise. So I can put this here and attach it to the warp, and then I would give this a different value if I wanted to break. Like this is the amount it's using. So if I wanted to use less of it, only in certain sections,
Right.
I could put a
okay.
value into the Perlin noise.
Okay.
And then if I wanted to only spawn it closer, I'd put a trigger, and so on and so forth. So now what we're going to do, I'm just going to keep throwing things at you while I got people on camera listening.
Yeah, you know,
I'm going to take this out.
This is like a tutorial video.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a slope select. Okay. So I'm going to tell all of this stuff to do the warp. And within all of this, I want it to draw different textures by different angles of terrain.
Right.
What this allows us to do is get that rocky stuff poking up out of the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, actually I don't think I can do it this way. So I'm going to say from 30 to, let's put it lower, 25, 30, and 80, and 90. Okay, so what that's saying is from 25 to 30 degrees, begin blending in another material, and then draw it from 100% from 30 to 80 degrees, and then blend out at 90 back into the other material lower than as we go all the way around.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in that, I think I can do it this way. Let's see if it works.
In general, I like components being unique by type, but that's
I'm going to lose my voice here. Okay, so what happened was it started to try and blend in this gray rock. And we need to, let's change the, all right.
Whoa.
So now what we've done is I've given it a lot of noise and a lot of lumpiness, and I'm now getting this rock texture blending probably a little too much.
Wait, but where do you get that rock texture from?
I assigned it with this texture.
Oh, yeah, I didn't see that note there. Okay. It's quite straightforward.
Yeah, so now I've got all this rock wherever it pretty much goes up.
Right.
It's blending a little too much. Oh, wait, start at 25. I think it's because I'm only using one node and I'm not telling it to, I'm not 100% certain. I don't know why some of this is drawing in here. I'd have to spend more time with it. There's a lot of little happy things that happen that you're like, you learn from as you go, and I've watched Ben and I do this and we're like, I'm not sure why that's happening. Give me 15 minutes to figure that out. But this allows you to get a lot of stuff really quick. Now, obviously, I don't necessarily want it to all be the same values, so I can use other qualifiers to say where and when and how to do it. But all of this is how we build a lot of it.
Right. So on that slope, you can blend two textures by using the multi, right?
With this, I can blend, yes. Yeah, so I actually have in the grass planes, it's mostly grass or the other materials, and then what it does is it blends into kind of like a cluster of rocks, little gravel and stuff, and then as it gets higher it goes into solid rock. So then when it comes back down, it goes back to the cluster of gravel and back into grass.
Right.
So you get this little blend where it looks like rocks are poking up out of the grass. And then I'd like to do some more experimentation for some other ideas where I've got kind of bigger pieces and I spawn rocks inside of that. So wherever, instead of just doing a slope, right, back down to the grass, I'd like to spawn some rocks in there and see if I could have some control over them and see what I get out of that. So it'd be like, you know, clusters of rocks. And I think that might work for like big cliffs where it's like, you know, really huge and I want to spawn a bunch of noise inside of it, which would basically be big, obtuse rocks. But, you know, like maybe long, something that looks like it fits into it. So you asked about being able to go in here. Okay, so this zone has an ID, which is right there. I'm going to copy that ID, open up this, and I'm going to paste that ID in. Dionne. Okay. All of this stuff, don't use the server, go to this zone, be flying by default, and skip the spawn loading will get you into your level doing all those things. So what I'm going to do is go over here, hatchery, hold down Alt, and this is something everybody can do. This is what we can do. Play now, and you'll see I've got from the last time I did this, and it's got. I'm going to swap out my zone with your zone. Oh, nope. So if we haven't said it a million times, everything's buggy and in flux right now as we fix all this stuff. Oh, you know what it is? I don't think I ever hit save over here. That might be it.
Right. Don't forget to save.
Let's see if it works. Oh,
I came from this event, which came from this event, because each event that has its parent event.
Control Z.
Yeah.
Or that could even just be useful.
well, let's see if it loads. No, nothing's happening. Literally nothing is happening.
But this is a mechanic that is in game currently where it does stop at some point.
Yeah, it's like the unintended.
Well, that's new. All right, we're not going in there. Let's see if I try my zone, if it's something to do with the zone I picked. Oh, yeah, this isn't all the things. I just want to see what happens. Yeah, something's not working. Don't know. Like I said, everything's in flux right now. So anyway, if you wanted to, I can give you that command, and you just pick the zone you want to go into, and then you can walk around and look at it. So if we actually change this to my test zone, where is everything? I seem to be stuck.
Yeah, so here, for the, yeah, it's not going to be one person writing one event.
All right, something's not working because I'm not getting anything.